All right, so Derek, we are in week 3 of Resurrected, and we're coming to one of the most interesting stories, I think, of the resurrected Jesus, and that is with one of the disciples who doesn't believe.
Yeah.
And it's because he wasn't there. The first time that Jesus appeared to him, and we call him Doubting Thomas. I think that's kind of a unfortunate moniker. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
But, Thomas is not there that Easter Sunday when Jesus first appears to them. And so he comes back to the room and it's just, they're telling him all this story about like, hey, we just saw Jesus.
Yeah.
He let us, touch his side and touch the wounds in his hand and all of this. And Thomas is, well, come on, guys. Like, I mean, it kind of feels like, you walk into a group of friends and they're trying to be like, hey, we just did this. And you're like, okay.
It makes sense.
Yeah. And so kind of put yourself in Thomas's shoes a little bit. Like, how do you feel in that moment? Like, what are you thinking?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's definitely not anything I've experienced before. Like if it were me, I would have really no previous context to like, hey, that could actually happen.
Right.
Because I think you look at it very literally and it's like, okay, I've uprooted my life to follow this guy. I saw him do remarkable things. It's not just that I thought that he was this person, it's that I saw with my own eyes what he was doing and the miracles he had and he created and the people's lives he changed. And then he died, and the hard part about that for me would be this, and I know we'll talk about this in the coming weeks, is this ultimate form of disappointment where I think first and foremost, that's where kind of that would sit for me, that would kind of blind me and I wouldn't really know what to do with that. And so I don't know if I would trust my friends' opinions on it.
Yeah. It's interesting that, in John's gospel, this is the third time Thomas has kind of spoken up about things. He has a couple other moments. In John 11, when they're going back to Jerusalem, Thomas is the one who speaks up and says, let us go that we can die with him.
Yeah.
In John 14, in the upper room discourse, when Jesus is saying, you know the way to where I'm going. And Thomas says, no, Lord, like we don't know the way to where you're going. So Thomas is very much a pragmatist, I think. Like he's very much like, I want to see this. I want to believe this.
Sure.
And we get that, from this account is like he wants to know very solidly, like, hey, this is what's going on here. So Jesus appears on that Easter Sunday, but we're told that he doesn't appear again to the 11. Judas is gone at this point. He doesn't appear to them until 8 days later. And it's just interesting that Jesus lets Thomas, sit in that doubt.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
For 8 days, he has to sit in that place where he's thinking about, what are these guys? What are these guys doing? right. These guys are just telling me a story.
Sure.
So when you think about our time and you think about our situation in comparison to Thomas's, like how do we sit in those places of doubt? Like what does that look like for us in our culture today?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hard questions people have. And a lot of times they're kind of in that place, but they've never really known Jesus before. They maybe heard about him. I remember, put it in context for us, Greg Allen, one of our campus pastors, was doing communion this past Easter weekend, and my family and I were there, and he had brought up Thomas in his communion message and at the end, because he had talked about, as a college student being in seminary, there were so many hard questions that were almost unanswerable, and he had such a hard time dealing with that. And he really put himself in Thomas's shoes. And the thing that he encouraged all the people there that weekend for Easter, because I'm sure there was a lot of us there that do know Jesus, but there are probably a lot of people there that don't know Jesus. And what he encouraged us with was that, like, hey, no matter how big your doubts are, like, Jesus is not afraid of those. Like, he's not intimidated by those. And so when I was thinking about this today, that's what came back to my mind of, like, Jesus wasn't put off. He wasn't, he wasn't offended by Thomas's doubt. Like, he literally held out his wounds for him. And I think in different ways, Jesus does that for us, through scripture and through people in different ways that he speaks to us.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly very interesting that when Jesus confronts Thomas's doubt, he doesn't look down on Thomas. Mm-hmm. He doesn't yell at Thomas.
Sure. Yeah.
Just very kind of gently says, no, this is exactly the proof you wanted. And I love how you said that Jesus can handle that he can deal with that when we need proof, like Jesus offers us himself. Like, this is who I am, and this is what I've done. So, I think we kind of envy Thomas a little bit in this circumstance where it's like, Thomas asked for this proof. Thomas asked that he could see the resurrected Jesus, and we don't get that,
Right.
So how do we work through that, in our own doubts? What have been some things that have helped you as you think about your own doubts?
Yeah, I think it was at the end of this passage that we were reading, is that, in several different points of scripture, we're just talking about, blessed are those who believe in me and haven't seen, and so I really try in my heart to really grasp onto that, and so I think that's a theme for me without my life, is that I really try to find passages of scripture that I can really anchor my life in, because there's a lot of things that, we can anchor our lives in different things and different hopes and different dreams, and ultimately those will either come true or fail, but they never fulfill us. They're not sustaining like scripture will be. But I think at the same time, like I think it's through prayer too for me, where I think God has been very kind to be the same way of accepting whatever those doubts are. And he's had very unique circumstances in my life where he's just been like, hey, trust me. And that can be through a person entering into my life. It can be through me praying for something and it happening or not happening, but still seeing God's goodness in the midst of it. Because we're never going to get to this place where we're like, hey, yes, I fully 1000% every day of my life. It's this roller coaster each day of trying to figure it out. But for me, I think it comes from being in prayer and being in scripture. And when that is our anchor, that helps us be a little more level-minded whenever we go through seasons of heavy doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think in my own journey, one of the things that has really helped me is from the time I was in Bible college, like I was really interested in apologetics. And for some of those, like, hey, these are the historical reasons why we think our faith is true. And, there's been books and books and books. And so way too many things that we could talk about in this space. But there is one thing that I continually come back to. And there was a British lawyer named Lionel Luckhoo, who investigated the case for the resurrection, I should say. And he came up with kind of 3 E's that helped him know the truth of what we believe. And those 3 E's were early, empty, and eyewitness. That the accounts of the resurrection were early. That, within 5 years of this happening, there were creeds that were written by the early church. 1 Corinthians 15, 3-4 is an account of one of those. Like that this is what is of first importance, that Christ died and rose again. So early, we have empty, that the tomb was empty, that regardless of what you believe about the resurrection, that Jesus' tomb was empty. And so you have to explain how that is. How did that happen? Was it because he rose from the dead, or did something else happen? And what does the weight of historical evidence show there? And then finally, eyewitness. He talked about that there were so many eyewitnesses of the gospel, or of Jesus's resurrected body. In 1 Corinthians 15, 3-8, Paul lists off, 513, I think it is, different eyewitnesses who saw Jesus.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about that level of eyewitness testimony. If you talk to those guys just for minutes, you'd be there for hours.
Sure.
Listening to these guys. So I think when we look at some of those things, we can have that confidence that, this happened, that Jesus is who he said he was. I said earlier, Thomas gets a bad rap. But after he gets the proof that he wants, I want you to just notice here in John 20, 28, he exclaims, "My Lord and my God."
Yeah.
Right. So how does that speak to you, that Thomas was able to take that proclamation of who Jesus was just by what he saw?
Well, I think for each of us, we get to that place where, I'll back up and say he had gotten the most real evidence that you could ever have, and you could see as you study different things that the rest of his life embodied that, from that belief of he is real, and so for us, we don't necessarily get to have that physical manifestation of Jesus right in front of us, feeling his scars, but what we do have is scripture. We have his church, we have a spirit, and at each of us, we have to make that decision. And oftentimes it's this daily reminder to ourselves that, like, he is alive, he is real, and he is moving.
I think Thomas shows us that doubt is a good place to visit, but it's a terrible place to live.
Yeah.
And that when we see Jesus for who he is, we exclaim, "My Lord, my God," because he's big enough to prove to us who he is.